Welcome. It looks like I've got just a small group to start, but I'm going to keep an eye on that waiting room as more people show up. I'm super grateful to those showing up live, and also am going to be sharing the recording. So I imagine a lot of folks are going to be watching this recording later. And to those who watch it, thank you for watching later. Just to get started, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Brooke Allegian Presley. I've been an outdoor educator since 2007. It's a life calling that I found very early in life. And I've been lucky enough to work for some incredible organizations like Wilderness Awareness School, the National Park Institute, or the National Park Service, um, Waldorf schools. I've worked for a variety of different independent nature schools. And I've also founded three of my own forest schools. That operated out of city and county parks. Now I work for a city parks department, so I feel like I kind of have seen all the different sides of this coin, and I'm really excited to share the different pieces of this knowledge that I have to hopefully make it easier for people to start their own programs. Um, the other day, as I was walking up to work, I was smelling, just the smell of somebody's fire in their fireplace or campfire of sorts. And, it reminded me of my forest school in Seattle. And we had campfires every day and we would cook over the fire. And, I just feel so grateful for the opportunity that kids have to like have that be what they walk up to their school environment and they get to smell a campfire or feel the rain on their rain gear or hear the sound of their boots crunching in the snow, all of these amazing connective experiences, whatever they be. I'm so grateful to all those who are providing those type of experiences to children out in this world. And so if there's anything that I can do to make it easier for people to provide those experiences to children and make it possible for children to have those formative nature connection experiences, I'm just so pleased to have the opportunity to share that. So thank you very much for being here. Um, Let me pull up my presentation. Okay, great. So, partnering with parks. Again, just to recap, having been both a permit holder, a contract holder, as well as a Parks Department employee, I feel like it's my duty to share this information with people to make this process easier. When I first started off in my career of outdoor education, I saw parks departments as fairly intimidating entities, hard to work with, and holding a lot of power where they could, lay down the law and say, no, actually, you can't operate out of our parks. So I used to feel like I was kind of walking on eggshells, and dancing around, sort of not knowing what the parks wanted from me and how to, be welcomed within those spaces, especially as a business owner. And so you know, having figured some of that out over the years, I hope that I can save people some of the hurdles that I went through. So just to start, there are so many benefits to partnering with your local parks department. Of course, one of those huge benefits is permission. You need permission to operate in these spaces so that you don't, risk getting kicked out or getting fined for, operating a business that's not in legality. A lot of cities have specific codes that refer to whether or not people can operate business in public spaces. And they typically have very specific guidelines about how that needs to happen. And so just that's one thing to be mindful of is you need that permission. That's one of the huge benefits to this partnership. Second is relationship. So you can actually have a very strong and beneficial relationship with your parks department. So I have a little story, and that's where this photo comes through here. after I developed a great relationship with the Seattle Parks Department, whenever we would notice some of the parks maintenance staff, pruning and doing things like that, if they had clippings that were appropriate to, be left out, we would ask if we could have those clippings rather than having them taken away to yard waste. Because, for our preschoolers, natural plant clippings made great toys. And in this case, this tree grew legs. It was very cute. But, this was one of the clippings that was given to us by the park staff. And they regularly would see us and give us, clippings that we could use then, to play with and to use as materials with the students. That's just one example. But when you have park staff who are looking out for you, who appreciate what you're doing, and who have a positive relationship with you, they're more likely to extend those olive branches, so to speak, or in this case, it was an English laurel branch. So that's a great benefit. And then, of course, resources. Depending on the level of partnership that you work on with your department, it could unlock a variety of resources that would make it, that would just enhance your ability to run your nature program. An example I have of this is my my water key. It's just a square key. You can get it at a hardware store. But I was given that information by one of the park staff, who knew that we were doing some restoration work. We were tending to the plants in our park. And so he said, here, this is how you get one of these keys so that you can just hook a hose up and water the plants. As you can imagine, when you're running a nature program with children, running water is a commodity and something very valuable to have. And that's not something that we would have had any access to without, the partnership that we had. So that's just another piece. If you don't mind, I'm just going to minimize this for just a moment to make sure that I don't have anyone in the waiting room. I wouldn't want to keep anyone sitting there for too long. Okay, perfect. We're good. Wonderful. Thanks for your patience there. All right, so just to break it down, there's two main ways that you can work with your parks departments to get in a great relationship where you have all those benefits that I just outlined. The first one is permitting. This is a very classic route to take, and in many cases, it's the only option. I highly recommend, I've permitted with parks on a number of occasions, both city, county, and state parks are all able to offer permits of this variety. Permitting is great because you maintain full independence as a business owner and as an organization. Um, you're not, beholden to any park protocols or policies, and you maintain a separation from an identity perspective. So that's one reason that permitting is really great. It's also generally very flexible. That being said, the flexibility can depend on how in demand certain park spaces are and how flexible your department is willing to be. But generally within the framework that you can work with in permitting, which we'll get into in great detail, you do have a bit more flexibility about how you might want to operate your program, how you might want to work with, pricing and, income, how you manage things like that. So that would be another reason that permitting could be the better option. Um, Another reason is just looking at your business structure. Permitting is generally going to be an expense, and how much that costs will depend entirely on your department. I've seen permits cost $35 and I've seen permits cost 3,000 and upwards. And that just depends on how in demand the park location is, and what the pricing model for your parks department is. Um, Generally, you can get that information even if it's not listed on their website just by calling them. You can get that information pretty easily. And having that up front when you're constructing your business model is really important so that you can know how much to factor in. So in the case of permitting, it is generally an expense. Occasionally, they will waive the expense. So we'll get into that later too. Um, Another benefit of permitting is just that it's almost always available. Some departments will have both permitting and contracting as an option. Others will not have contracting, but generally speaking, permitting is something that you will have access to. So that's a great reason to know about it and be well versed in the process. Um, One other potential benefit, depending on how you consider it, is that you will have less contact with your parks office. In permitting, you might correspond with them potentially up once a year, or a few times a year, depending on their permit cycle. Versus with contracting, you'll be in a lot closer contact with them. So that's the kind of quick benefits of permitting. Contracting is more of a working partnership with your department. So with contracting, you enter a relationship where oftentimes the park is advertising your programs as one of the, Parks and Rec sponsored activities. And so it involves much more of a relationship with the department. Your business is still its own entity, completely independent. And no matter what the structure of your business is, it still remains its own entity. Um, but the difference is that from an outside perspective looking in, there's a lot more intertwined identity between the Parks and Rec department and your programs. This can be great because it can provide a wider customer base. Oftentimes, they have their own advertising streams, and when you contract with the park department, they'll include you in those advertising streams. Um, Another thing to consider from a business model perspective is that, unlike permitting, which is an expense, contracting is a source of income. Generally, you will send an invoice to the Parks Department, and then they will pay you directly. We'll get into how all of that works as well. But then you will receive, like a 1099 that shows the income that you as an individual or as a business have made working with their department. So for different reasons, some people might prefer to, have it be an expense. Other people might prefer to have it come in as an income, especially if you're starting with little overhead, then having it come in as an income can be a great way to start. Um, and then lastly, contrasting with the, less contact with the parks office, one of the things about contracting is that you develop a closer relationship with the parks department. So depending on your goals there, it could be a really beneficial thing to do. So we'll get into now the details of each of those processes. So to start with permitting, like I said, permitting is one of the most straightforward ways to go about getting permission to operate business in a park. There's a whole variety of different types of permits, and I have them listed here on the presentation. I'll go into them very briefly, but knowing too much about the different permits isn't so important. What's important is just knowing how to find a permit with your department and go about applying for it. So just really briefly to go into it, you've got special use permits. This is your very generic, I want to operate business in a park permit. So many departments will have some form of this. There's also a special event permit. This is generally used for public events, which depending on your business structure and what your nature program is offering, you may or may not want to have public events. But that's generally what that event would be, or what a special event permit would be used for. Occasionally, if a parks department has a limited set of permit forms, they might give you a form that doesn't quite match what you're doing, and just ask you to kind of go with it and fill in what applies. So in some cases, you may be given a special event permit, even if it doesn't quite fit what you're doing, just because that might be one of the only types of permits that they have. Um, Next, there's a concession or vendor permit. This is another one of those situations because you don't really think of yourself as a concessionaire selling hot dogs at the park. But one of the ways that I was able to work with the Seattle Parks Department was through a concession permit, because that was just one of the types of permits that they had available to me at the time. Um, And, over the period of a few years, we decided on, other types of permits in the end, but that was one that we started with, and, it worked for us for quite a while. And it did give us that legal permission to operate business in a park. So, um, that might be something that you have offered or available to you. The same as a commercial activity permit. A lot of these, are just different names for similar types of permits. Um, in some cases, a parks department won't have a permit that's suited to the type of activity that you want to do, but they will have a policy that says if you want to operate business in the park, you have to rent one of our park facilities, such as a picnic shelter. Sometimes you can even rent a picnic table, depending on their rental structure. So that would be the case of a facility use or rental agreement would be where you're renting that space, and then that gives you the permission to operate business um, within your rental space there. Um, there's a community partnership or memorandum of understanding. This is the case where you're most likely to have fees waived. This is less common, but possible if your department especially really values the work that you're doing, and sees it as something that they want to wholeheartedly support. They might be able to work up a memorandum of understanding, or another document. Oftentimes, this is not something that parks departments will have on hand. Depending on your relationship with the department, you might be able to convince them to get something written up. And most cities or counties or state parks departments would have access to an attorney on staff who would be able to get something written up for them. So um, that I wouldn't recommend that without a very strong relationship first. But if you did have a very strong relationship and you wanted to suggest something like that, those are some ways that people are able to work within the parks without having to exchange any money. Um, this can occasionally be true of an education or environmental education access permit too. Um, but in most cases, those are just a lower cost permit that has more flexibility around the hours that you spend in the park and being able to spend longer periods of time. So that's just a brief overview there. I will be taking questions at the end, but feel free to jump in if you have any questions in the meantime. I'm more than happy to pause and take questions if I know I'm kind of giving a lot of information all at once. So do feel free to jump in if you have any questions. So with permitting, there are a few considerations. One of them, of course, as I said, is cost. And this will vary entirely based on your department. So I can't really tell you across the board, what it's going to be. But what I can say is that you can get that information up front and then think about planning it into your business structure. So often the cost for permitting is due up front as well. So that's just one more thing to factor in. Get to know what that cost is going to be for your local area, and then decide, is that something that you can plan to pay up front, and how far in advance that you're going to want to pay it. There will be a variety of requirements when you apply for a permit with your parks department. So those will typically include proof of your business license, as well as proof of insurance. We'll get into insurance. I know that's going to be everybody's big hot topic. So I do have a whole section about insurance coming up. So you'll need proof of the business license, proof of insurance. Depending on your state regulations, you might also need to show proof of having, a childcare license or another, type of license that permits you to offer, camps, classes for children. Let's see, I think I said all of them. I've got it written here, sorry. Yep, that's all of them. Those are your typical requirements that you'll have to submit along with your permit. You'll also generally have to submit a map of your area of use, especially if it doesn't fall into a really typical, rental facility, like like a picnic shelter, if you're planning on, using a section of the woods in your park or something like that, you're going to want to submit a map along with your application that shows your area of use, and that'll very often be required as part of the permit. Um, Keep in mind the structure of the department. It can sometimes be a little bit tricky to track down the type of permit that you need. And not all cities, counties, and state departments are structured exactly the same way. Um, it's most common for the Parks Department to offer the permits and the permit applications and to be the ones that certify the permits. But occasionally that does go through different city departments. So if you're having trouble finding what you need through the Parks Department, consider looking into a permitting department, a development services department, something of that nature. And you might be able to find what you're looking for. Um, Similarly, if you are contacting you know, one section of the Parks Department and not having luck. And this is something that we'll talk about a little later. There's different sections of the Parks Department that you can kind of tap for, you know, potentially a different response. So we'll go into that a little bit later, but just keep that department structure in mind. If you're not finding the permit that you're looking for, um, call around, look for, do a little digging and find the department that you're going to need. I will say very often the permits are not readily available online. Occasionally they are, and that's very lucky when they are. But in a lot of cases, especially if you're looking to do something outside of the traditional, like sell hot dogs in the park kind of moment, you might need to call them and be referred to the exact form that they would want to have you fill out. So that's another place where that department structure just comes into play. Next is just thinking about your relationship with the Parks Department, and that is very strongly based on your reputation. Um, the the reputation that the parks employees receive of you will largely depend on, of course, their interactions with you, but also how they observe you, behaving essentially within the parks. Parks employees tend to, or parks departments tend to be pretty tight knit. And even when it seems like, there's a lot of privacy and there's not a lot of people around, they do notice things. And going, rogue, operating without a permit, can lead to a very poor reputation from that department. And unfortunately, just based on the nature of parks work, grudges really get developed and held. And so I would just say it's a lot easier to never have a grudge against you than to have to repair a grudge that's already developed. So that's one thing, just, think about how you're going to be perceived by your parks department and try to develop a strong reputation. It's going to help the success of your permit getting approved. The early bird gets the permit. That's the other thing here. Permits are generally issued on a first come, first serve basis. And if you're especially wanting to work out of a popular or highly used space, you're going to want to get that permit in very, very early. But just in general, the earlier you can get it in, the better. Parks departments will often have to run their permits through multiple other city departments before they can get approval. And so turning in a permit with a quick turnaround time does sometimes stress people out. So I would just say, for the sake of that relationship, the earlier that you can turn in an application, the better. And the better your chances of, you know, getting the approval that you want, especially if you're in, just a highly used parks department. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, with those unique circumstances, those of us who are running nature schools are often going to be the first people approaching our parks department with a program like this, especially, in departments where this is less common and more groundbreaking. They may have never heard of such a thing. Um, and maybe, their education permit only offers single day options like for a field trip. And, maybe they have the concessions permit, but that doesn't quite work either. So I would just say, be willing to work with a member of that department to, try to figure out what's going to be the best match. And the more that you can remain flexible and positive through those interactions, the more that they're going to want to kind of support that. Um, we're going to get more, however, into, building that relationship with your parks department. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But just know that you might have to reach out if those unique circumstances come up. Let's see. Okay, contracting. So next, I just want to kind of overview what it looks like to be a contractor with a parks department. This is something that I have a lot of experience with because I'm a recreation coordinator at my current job, and I do the onboarding for a lot of our contract instructors. I also developed my relationship with my current parks department by being a contract instructor. And then I was hired on by the department later when, the position came open and it seemed like a great match. So um, that's just my background with contracting is I deal with it quite often. Like I said earlier in the presentation, not all parks departments have the option for contracting. And sometimes you do have to dig a little bit to find it within a department. But for those that do have it, if you have the option to consider it, I would definitely consider it because it has a lot of benefits. For one, let's see. So I guess we talked about the benefits before. So when you enter a contracting relationship with the city, you're basically a business that's been hired by the city or by the city, the county, whatever agency you're working with, um, to offer a service. So it's like you've been hired as, a plumber or a house contractor or, some other business service. Um, they typically will offer a revenue split. And so 70-30 split is very common, 75-25, 60-40, generally a commission split where the agency gets the smaller amount and you, the business owner, gets the larger amount. What that generally breaks out to cover is that the agency, the Parks Department, will provide you the facility at no cost to you, obviously, because that's part of the cut that they're making. They will advertise your programs, and their advertising can be a really great way to get outreach. So that's something to consider. And they will generally conduct registration for you. So if you don't have or want to work with a registration software, or want to field phone calls and things like that, that can be a benefit to working with the department as well because they will generally manage the registration piece. So you get those, three kind of services for that 30 to 40%. And then the 70% that you take home covers, all of your business expenses, to include your salary, your insurance, any other overhead that you have, any staff that you pay, materials, etc. So that's how that works out. Um, the advertising, can be a really great opportunity. Many departments have like an activity guide that's like a little magazine that they either mail out to all of the local residents, or get out to a lot of businesses. So it can be great reach because people are often very inclined to flip through, their Parks and Rec guide and see what's going on. So I've found in my experience that you end up getting a lot of families who may not have otherwise discovered your programs. They may not have been seeking out something of that nature, but when they saw it in the Parks and Rec guide, they thought it looked fun. Being in the Parks and Rec guide gives you a little bit of um, trust, I suppose. People feel like it's park affiliated, and so they're generally more trusting and willing to just sign up without vetting it too closely. And so it makes it easy to get a lot of people coming to your programs and trying it out. This is one reason that I recommend even to people who are running their programs generally on private land, that if they have the opportunity to contract with their local parks department for, a couple weeks of summer camp or a couple of programs, it can be a great way just to get reach out to the community and help people discover what they have going on. So the advertising can be very valuable. And as I mentioned, they'll generally do the registration as well. So to become a contract instructor, there's an application. It's very similar to, you know, the permit in some cases, but it involves also filling out a proposal of, what class you want to offer, there's a lot of specifics that will generally be asked for, such as your minimum and maximum number of students. That's a really common question. And parks, need to know that because if if they need to have a clause that says we will cancel the class if it's below minimum. And that's just generally part of their structure. So they'll ask you for the ages of your participants, the minimum and maximum number of participants, they'll ask you for descriptions and titles and what will the participants get out of their experience. And so you'll turn in that proposal. And as long as they, accept your proposal and are interested in your classes, then they will go on with an onboarding process. This will generally be a background check, a reference check. They'll generally ask you for references just as if you were applying for a job. You'll be issued a contract, and sometimes you'll be asked to provide an exhibit for that contract, which would be essentially an outline of the things that were in your proposal. And that's just, these are the services that I'm agreeing to offer for this contract period. So I'm making it sound, simple and easy. If you want more details about it, I do have a guide that I created. It ended up being about 45 pages long. And the first 12 pages of it are just straight up instructions, step-by-step instructions, and they include every element of the application. So every question that you should expect to be asked before you even open up an application. It also has an appendix with sample applications from different departments. So it's a great thing to check out if you want to have, just access to what a lot of different departments might be asking so that you can be prepared to submit a proposal to any department that you want to work with. It covers all the bases of things that would typically be asked for. So let's see. We've got onboarding. We talked about the shared advertising. Move on to the next one. So this is kind of one of the fun parts, and one part that makes a lot of people really nervous is creating a strong proposal or application for your parks department. So you'll determine between permitting and contracting, what option is available to me, and then, if both options are available, which option is more well suited to your business. And then once you've decided that, you're just going to need to find the application that you need to work through. Um, the application will ask you lots of straightforward questions, but what I want to talk about is how to make your application stand out from others, and how to make it a really strong and convincing application. So first, I do want to just say, answer all the questions. You would be shocked as a, Parks and Rec employee. I see it often. People will fill in the forms and leave a lot of stuff blank because they think, maybe it's not important. And while it might not be important to, the person filling out the form, it might be very important to the Parks Department. And then, you know, someone will end up having to correspond back and forth a number of times to kind of fill in the blanks. So just fill in all the information, even if it doesn't seem important. And if you have to guess on something or you're flexible, just put in something and then you can add a little note that you're flexible. So for instance, the minimum and maximum number of students. This is one where I get a lot of people being like, whatever. I did just whatever. And I'm like, well, I I, as the parks employee, can't decide for you because it's this whole like we're in a legal agreement and it's contracted. So, like, need the contractor to decide for themselves what those numbers are going to be. Um, and so you could just, kind of just think about it and just be like, oh, well, I guess two for the minimum, or I guess four for the minimum, or, whatever sounds comfortable. You might have a very clear financial breakout where you're like, actually, I need 6 kids to make my bottom line. Um, Great, put that. But if you're like, "Ah, I don't know, I don't really care, just make up a number. Um, because if the parks department is like, wow, 15 is your minimum, that's really egregious. We don't usually get that many people to sign up for a program, they'll tell you that. So you know, put what seems right for you and your best guess. And if something needs to be adjusted, they will reach out to you for it. But try to fill in as many of the answers as you can. Um, to whatever degree you can, also include a cover letter and any photos that you can. So in in a proposal that I have in that guide that I was referencing, I just have an example proposal, and it includes an appendix with a bunch of pictures and captions, just really trying to visualize for the parks employee who's going to be reading that application, what is the benefit of my program being in their park. Um, this is where some of the fun comes in because you want to align with your department's goals. So I have this worksheet here. This is part of the book, and it gives you some hints of what to look for in your department. So grab one of the activity guides, if you have one, or go online and look at what their offerings are. And you might find some of these things. If they have an ADA inclusive playground, this is what a lot of parks departments are building these days. If they have an adaptive sports program or adaptive recreation, if they have bilingual programming, things like that, or sensory friendly programming, those things can tell you that they have a value for, equity, for diversity, for inclusion. I said those in no particular order. Um, there's also, say they have nature trails or interpretive signage, that shows that they value nature connection, that they value ecology. Say they've got, classes for all different kinds of ages, or a really unique community event that no other town has that, is really well attended and cherished by the community. Those things show innovation. And so what you can do is get to know what your department is offering and kind of figure out what does that say about their goals and their priorities. Generally, the generally parks departments are drowning in ideas and goals and things that they'd like to do and things that people have suggested that they would do if they had the time and the budget. But there's always these time and budget constraints. So anything that your department is doing, it shows you that it's a very high priority of theirs and a very high value. And so if you can pull on that and highlight something that they're already doing as evidence of their values, that's a great way to start off that relationship. The department that I work for has a really cool no cost childcare program over the summer. It's absolutely innovative and cool. And when I first, began building a relationship with the department, I told them how cool and innovative I think it is. And, you know, it shows that you're not only paying attention to what they're doing, but appreciating the goal behind it. And it can make them feel, seen and appreciated and understood, and like they're on the same level as you, really. So it's a great thing to do when you can, highlight those things. Um, Also, highlighting the specific benefits of your activity, that's really important. So, there's quite a number of really huge positives that come with nature-based education in public parks. Some that I have used before to really just show this is, for one, there's an increase in positive use. This is something that, parks departments are always looking at, is how can we bring more positive use into the parks, more kids and families and, wholesome things, because that does deter, negative use or misuse of park spaces. And so it not only contributes to people feeling safer in their park spaces generally, but it also contributes to just the overall safety in the community, or at least that's the theory. So, having that increase in positive use can definitely be a deterrent for misuse. Stewardship of park spaces is another one. So, generally speaking, when you're out with kids, you might be picking up litter as you go, or you might be, you know, keeping an eye on things. And, if you notice, something dangerous or a large pile of litter that you can't get all at once, you might be reporting it, having these eyes on the park, having these, hands that are able to do work. That's of value to the park. In the same way that that positive use is, it having a lot of eyes on the park and having a park be well cared for just causes other people to care for it. Um, it's sort of that effect. I forget the name of it, but when you see something dirty, you're more willing to, throw a wrapper on the floor or something like that. But if something looks nice and clean, you're more willing to keep it up and want to keep it nice and clean. We'll talk towards the end of this presentation about some more ways that you can do park stewardship through, restoration projects and things like that. So for those of you who are interested in getting more into that, that can be extremely valuable, both for the kids in your program and also towards your relationship with the Parks Department. And then finally, raising future advocates of the park. So when you're working with government agencies, they're always thinking about their funding, and their funding is largely based on the public, how the public values parks, and their programs, um, and how the public communicates that to their elected officials. So, pointing out within your application or in a cover letter or something like that, that by growing up, becoming connected to nature, um, having formative experiences in these parks, these kids are going to grow up to be people who love parks, and their parents are going to be grateful for the parks that are holding their kids during this stage of their life. So this creates a relationship between people and their local parks, and that's something that parks departments really value. So you can pull on that. And if you have, stories that you can share about connective experiences that kids have had, a favorite tree that they like to visit, every year, and that they're going to continue to come back and visit when they're adults, or, it would be unique, obviously, to your particular program. But if you have stories that you can pull upon, that will illustrate how those kids are going to become, park lovers, that's a great thing to add. Okay, so insurance, the big stuff. This is what everybody struggles with. I know this from, Facebook groups and discussions with educators. This is extremely intimidating for a lot of people. I mean, insurance is it's tricky. So I have some tips to help make it easier, and to, just make the process less intimidating. I want to start by saying you can do it. I promise you. I am a person who very much shies away from legal jargon and administrative things and like, ugh, all of that, So insurance is not it's not anybody who's excited about it. But if I can do it, you can do it, is what I'm saying. So, I want you to trust that you are capable. Whenever you're working with a parks department, either as a permit holder or as a contractor, for, especially a nature program, you are definitely going to be required to show proof of insurance. And I'm going to break down exactly what type of insurance you need to have and what documents you need to show that. So you're going to need a general liability insurance. with coverage of 1 million combined single limit and 2 million aggregate. So basically what that means is 1 million per, occurrence, and 2 million total is how much the insurance company will cover. Um, you know, it's good to have insurance anyways because you as a business owner want to protect yourself, and the parks require it because when you're operating on their property, um, they need you to be responsible for what happens within your program rather than them being potentially held responsible for something that happens within your program. So that's why they require that. You'll need two documents to show your Parks Department that you have what they need. The first is a certificate of insurance. This is just the standard document that you get issued when you sign up for an insurance plan. You'll automatically receive that in the mail, and then you can just send them a copy of it. Generally, you can just scan it and email it to whoever your point of contact is. So that is a great thing. Oh yeah, of course. Um, that's a great thing. It's just super easy. You receive it, you give it to them. The next one is the part that a lot of people get stuck on, but it's not as difficult as it seems, and that is the endorsement page. So you'll need to call your insurance company and you will need to ask them to list your parks department as additional insured on your documents. Different departments will explain this in different levels of clarity, and I think this is where people get stuck, is it's just not often explained as clearly as it needs to be. But it's so simple. All you need to do is say, I need the city of Los Angeles to be listed as additional insured on my insurance policy. And I need an endorsement page. And your insurance company will know exactly what to do from there. They'll issue you an endorsement page and it will list, the agency that you're working with. Ask the agency how they want to be referred to on the insurance document. Some will want to be referred to by the city. Some will be want to be referred to by, city of whatever parks department. Um, so just find out how they want to be referred to on that form. But you just need to get them listed as additional insured and then provide that endorsement page. In that guide that I referenced, I put the city of Seattle's insurance requirements because they're very standard and they have really good examples of what the insurance documents look like, what the certificate of insurance looks like, and what the endorsement page looks like. They have two different varieties of endorsement page. So that's something if you're wanting more details and just a little bit more help for what that's going to look like. All the details are in that guide, and I'll have information about how to get it at the end. One thing I want to say is because so many people have struggled with this insurance issue, I have created a living document, and it's an insurance directory for nature school leaders. So it's just on Google Docs, so anybody can add to it at any time. But it's a collection of different insurance companies that nature schools have worked with. And people list, what state they're in, what their experience has been like working with that insurance company. And so that's a great thing to check into if you're having any trouble finding an insurance company that will cover your activities. Check through that guide and just see if you find a match. People will often also list who their representative is from that insurance company, which can make it a little bit easier to get started, or who their insurance broker is. And that's the next thing I would say is definitely work with an insurance broker if needed. Whenever I've struggled to find the liability insurance for my program, I've gone to a local insurance broker that does usually business and family insurance. And I've told them, this is what I'm doing, this is what I need insurance for. And they just found me the insurance company. And it wasn't one of, the typical like Francis Aldine or who, the typical outdoor school nature insurers. It was just some random other company. I think I put it in the insurance directory. But so working with a broker can be a great way to make it happen because they're very versed at, you know, reading through and picking the right policy and working with the insurance company to communicate what your needs are. So definitely, if you're struggling, work with a broker. Um, I would also say this is just sort of a personal tip, is that when you speak to the insurance company on the phone, they'll ask lots of details about your program, what activities that you do, what your site looks like. Operating in a public park generally does help for the site risk, because they know that parks have to be up to certain codes and standards. So that can be a strong point for you. But I would just add to be mindful of your wording when you speak to insurance companies. You don't want to um, hide any of the activities that you're doing, but you can choose wording that makes things sound a little bit less risky. And I learned this the hard way, by referring to an activity as hiking with children. And I'm talking 4-year-olds, right? So it's not really hiking. I said hiking, and they said, "Oh, no, 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 too risky." And, at that point, I couldn't, take it back. They just said, "No, you already said hiking." It's, um, I could have said nature walk, So just, really, and in that case, nature walk would have been more descriptive, right? It would have been more accurate. So just, be careful with your wording. Don't make it sound any more exciting than it is. Make it sound as, safe and mellow and, you know, cute as possible. That's just a, personal tip. Oh, and this QR code, sorry, goes right to that insurance directory. So if you're interested in checking it out, or it's at birdswithbrooke.com/insurance dash directory. So now just getting into a little bit more about creating that relationship with your local department. Like I mentioned before, building relationship is really important. Um, I when I started my nature school in Seattle, we started with a pretty small group of kids, and so we didn't have a permit at first. We just kind of waited to see what would happen. And it didn't take long at all. It was within just a few months that the parks maintenance staff stopped us and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing here? You got to call the office and, get a permit and all that good stuff." I was a little bit nervous, that we were going to get in trouble, but I called right away and said, "Hey, I was just told that we need to get a permit. So, I'd love to comply. Tell me what to do." And I was lucky enough that, the person I was talking to was receptive and actually connected me with the park gardener, Kevin, who you can see here in this picture. And Kevin and I ended up building a great relationship because we were both passionate about restoration work. And he mentioned to us the value of having, a group that's in the park every single day and can actually visit their plants and water them and, keep things up, not just, plant and leave like a lot of school groups had done. And so, we were really able to feed off of each other. But it was because of the friendship and the positive relationship that our program had with Kevin that our reputation within the department was able to blossom. And the permitting officer changed over during the period that we were with the park. And so for a while we had to fight, to retain our permit that we had held for all these years. And that was when it got switched from one type of permit to another and all this stuff. But one of the strongest things that I had was our relationship with Kevin, and some of the other maintenance staff that he worked with. Um, and the fact that they held us in such high regard was the thing that, tipped the scale and enabled us to kind of keep our permit. So, build that reputation, as early and as often as you can. Um, you know, uh, Lead with relationship. So I'm skipping one here, but um, lead with relationship with every single park employee that you see. So this is the people in the office that you're talking to on the phone. the parks maintenance staff that are emptying the trash, like every single park employee that you see. You can wave, you can be friendly, you can model gratitude with your students and say, oh, thanks for keeping our park so clean. We really love it here. Like those kind of interactions go a long way, especially with kids, right? Because it's adorable. And, like people, just like if you put yourself in the shoes of a park employee for a minute, they get badgered a lot by people with complaints. When you work in the office, you take a lot of unpleasant phone calls and emails, but when you work out in the park, you see a lot of people who, just saw some dog poop or just, think the grass is too long or whatever else. And people, badger these folks a lot. And so when you contrast that to like rolling up and there's this group of kids that's like so excited to see you and like wave and say thanks and like it's just it makes a big difference. It makes a difference in their day. And if they love seeing you, that is everything because, you know, I all of us know we're much more easily persuaded by people that we know and that are in our regular life. And, you know, they can receive permit applications from somebody all day, all week, and it's anonymous, it's somebody on paper. But if somebody in their office is like, those nature school, like, did you get a permit application from them? Because they told me that they've put in a permit application and they're really sweet. They say hi to me every day. That's the kind of stuff when a park employee has, a stack of paper this thick on their desk and they're spread too thin, as so many government employees are. And then, their coworker comes in and says, oh, this program that I care about told me they want a permit. Did you get their application? Guess which one's on the top of the stack, So just those relationships, they matter on every single level. Participate in your park's events. So whenever there's an event happening, especially if it's a big public event, if you are invited to it or if you have the opportunity to ask to participate, definitely do because not only is it great outreach, but it also offers value to the department. And so this is one of those kind of reciprocal things where if you participated in one of their events, they're going to be grateful for that and, feel like you did them a solid. So just keep your eye out for those events and participate in them whenever you can. And then, as I was kind of hinting at with, the like certain people, watching out for you and advocating for your program, just focus on the people who do support your program. This is the real world with humans. And there's always going to be some people who support what you're doing and think it's really cool. And there's always going to also be, the naysayers and the people that oppose what you're doing. And not to stereotype, but in the parks and recreation field, a lot of times people tend to get pretty stuck in certain ways of doing things and in certain policies. And like I said, it can take someone from within to kind of crack that shell and convince them to maybe think differently about something. So, while I had varying degrees of animosity with different, parks administrators in Seattle, what I always had was a great relationship with Kevin, and he was always an advocate for us that was, in our back pocket, just always there supporting us and, making sure that we felt welcome and supported by the department. So focus on those people who support and love what you're doing. And as I mentioned before, find the right department. So if you are looking to be a contractor, one thing to consider is that sometimes the parks and the recreation departments are split into separate departments, and parks might be under public works, and recreation might be under the library or the education department. So in cases like that, you might have to do a little bit of digging to find, the department that you need because maybe the permits might be coming from the parks department, but the contracting opportunities might be coming from the recreation department that's underneath the library. So keep that in mind, that even if you're looking to work out of a park, You might need to do a little, loop-de-loop path to get to the department that you need. All right, we're getting close to the end here. I know we're getting close on time. Thank you all for bearing with me. Um, I just want to talk about leveraging public support. So this is a really important factor when you're working with, again, public agencies. I touched on this earlier, but public support is everything, because that's what funding comes down to. When you have a city parks department, all of their funding is decided by the mayor and city council. When you have a county parks department, their funding is decided by the county commissioners. Um, and it's a little more complicated in state parks, but essentially the state legislature, manages a lot of that. And so you want to have strong public support, because if it ever comes down to, questioning whether your program is of value in a park, and you wouldn't think that public funding would, come down to that, but how many permits get offered in a given year, could be something that's affected by funding. Because if the parks department can't hire enough maintenance staff to properly maintain a certain, volume of people utilizing the parks, then they might reduce the number of permits that they grant in order to reduce the overall use of the parks, because they don't have enough staff to keep up with the demand. So, like, it's all intertwined. So that's why I'm saying this. Because if it ever comes down to it, where your park's like, hey, we're not offering that kind of permit anymore, like, I'm sorry, or, or with contractors, contracting, hey, like, we're reducing our class offerings, and, we're not going to be offering your programs anymore, kind of thing. If you have that public support, being, your families that attend your programs, any of, I know when I was running nature schools, there would be people who would walk by in the park and just smile and say, it's so nice to see kids playing outside. We love what you're doing. Those could also be your supporters, friends, people in the community that just know and support what you're doing. They should start early and praise the department that you're working with. Say, oh, like, write a letter to the director of the Parks Department and say, we are just so grateful that you've allowed this permit. Our son's nature school has, just changed our life. He was, struggling in traditional preschool, and being able to attend nature preschool has, made him love school again, or whatever that is from your individual families and supporters. Um, Sending that support keeps the people in the department invested in your program, and sending that support to, city council, mayor, county commissioners, whoever is the elected official overseeing the program, will get those people invested in it. And so if you can early on involve your families in just engaging, go to a city council meeting and tell them how much they love this program, especially if it's a contracted agreement. But even with permitting, it's still really valuable to say, we're grateful that the city offers these permitting opportunities because it's enriched our family's life. That goes a long way. And then if your program is ever at risk, those are the people that you can call on. And guess what? They're already comfortable going to city council or writing a letter to the parks director, because they've done it before. And so now, if you need that support of your program, people to write in and say, we heard that this permit is no longer going to be offered. We're so disappointed. As you may remember from my previous letter, this program means the world to me and my family. Please reconsider. You know, Almost everything in government comes down to those interactions with the public and what the public is asking for, especially in numbers. So just really, it might sound like overkill, but even in the best of times with parks departments, um, I've had permits come under threat before. So, having that is one of just your best backups. Okay, volunteer agreements. So I promised I would talk about this a little bit. It can be a great way to provide value to your parks department and show that you share common goals with them to become, a volunteer. This could be as informal as picking up trash, but you could enter a more formal volunteer agreement where you maybe adopt a park or become a park steward or become part of, a restoration effort. Um, Doing so, it shows your reliability, it shows your effort towards these shared goals of improving park spaces. It also gives the Parks Department a lot of trust that you're not going to damage things. Large groups of kids are known for causing erosion and breaking tree branches and, being a source of damage. And so if you can show them that your group of kids is actually not going to be a source of damage, but they're actually going to be stewarding the earth, that's a really powerful selling point. Um, Becoming, depending on what kind of volunteer privileges your department is able to offer you, this could give you greater ability to adapt to the landscape, which is something that I really valued. So in Seattle with my program, um, there were a lot of I got to make sort of like a forest classroom. And there were a lot of ways that I was able to adapt things, putting in trails, putting in little stairs on the trail, making log circles for the kids to sit in. And I was given sort of the authority to adapt the landscape based on the fact that it was part of a big restoration site that we were, working on a daily basis. And over the years, we planted over 600 trees and plants. It was very cool and became such a huge part of the curriculum for the kids. So if it's something that you have the opportunity to do, it's just fantastic. And oftentimes entering a volunteer agreement with the city will give you access to resources such as mulch, plants. They'll give you, the plants to plant in a lot of cases. Sometimes they'll even give you access to storage for tools and things like that. So I have our very hard-earned job box here. We were so excited to get that because, when you're running a forest school in a public park and you're transporting things to and from the park, having a little bit of storage on site is, huge. So that's that with volunteering. So really briefly, I'm going to get to some questions, but before I do, just want to tell you a couple quick ways to work with me. One is this guide that I've referenced a couple times in the webinar. It's 45 pages total. It's got 12 pages of step-by-step guidance that go through everything that we talked about in this webinar, just in a bit more detail. And then I have a very robust appendix with templates for liability waivers. I've got different examples of applications for different types of applications within different departments. Got permit applications, contract applications, got an example proposal. So there's lots of stuff in there. It's really everything you should need to get started working with your Parks Department. It's only $7 for people who are attending this webinar. After Saturday, the coupon code will no longer work and it'll be full price. But for those who are attending the webinar and purchase it before Saturday, it'll be $7. So that's that. Also, if you're interested in working further, I've got my Make Your Proposal Shine program. This is a one-on-one support where I work with you directly to learn about the Parks Department that you are aiming to work with and create a strong proposal. I will audit your proposal through the eyes of a Parks and Rec employee, and make sure that it's up to speed so that it'll be, really successful. And I'll answer any questions that you have going through that whole process and make sure that you have everything you need to get ready to go. So that is $89. I've also got the Nature School Starter Path. So having started 3 different nature schools, I just love any opportunity to help people get their own nature programs started. So this is 4 one-on-one sessions over 6 months. And you identify a goal, whether it be to, start your program or increase your enrollment or whatever that may be. We will spend those 4 sessions over 6 months working on that goal. And I'll provide tons of materials for you, templates of, marketing, insurance documents, staffing and contracts, parent handbooks, all that good stuff. So That one is my most expensive program, $249. And then we also have Inspired by Place, which is just a curriculum consultation to look at the specific site that you're working with and how to develop a curriculum that is really specific to that site. So with that, I will open it up to questions. I do have a couple questions that I received before the webinar started as well, so I can get into those. But feel free to jump in, Sarah, if you have any questions too. Um, One question that I received before the permit was, the pros and cons of operating with and without a permit. So I would just say, of course, operating without a permit is free, and uh, you don't have to involve the risk of receiving a no. So, it's kind of one of those like, you know, um, ask for forgiveness later, I think is the phrase that I'm looking for. Not always, terrible, especially if you have a small group. But I would say, the pros are that you get that peace of mind, you get those potential outreach benefits, and you have people on your side. You're not potentially starting with a damaged reputation, because the first way they discover you is that you're, breaking their rules. Um, One of the programs that I used to work for developed a reputation of being the nature destroyers. And, this was because there wasn't clear enough communication about, the goals of the program to the department and the, department affiliates, sort of like the parks foundations and friends of the parks and things like that. And so, if you don't have the opportunity to be the messenger about your program, then those departments that oversee the parks might get the wrong impression about your program rather than knowing how great it is and how helpful it could be. Another question I got was about community garden proposals. So this is a really interesting one because my department is currently working on installing a community garden. Um, this will be a big proposal for a city and something that they approach cautiously. Part of the reason for that is because anything new that gets put into the park will be put on a maintenance schedule. And so a maintenance schedule means, it has to get added into the workload of the park staff and they have to keep it up to a certain standard of care. So something like a community garden might be a pretty big addition to that maintenance schedule. And even if there's a volunteer group who wants to oversee it, they might not always want to oversee it. And so that's something that the park will consider a potential risk. They're also going to look into potential for vandalism, theft, damage, and encampments. So thinking about, the location, is it going to be fenced off? How is it going to be protected? They're also going to look at liability. So how are the garden beds built, and is it in a way that is going to fall in line with their, city insurance plan? And then cost and funding. So that's something that they're going to look at there. And then, oh, Sarah, I see you've got a question here. So yes, with the 1 and 2 million for the insurance, that is so with the 1 million, that is referring to the combined single limit. So, what that means basically is if there was an incident, and, two kids broke their leg, the combined limit for a single occurrence would be $1 million. So each, each kid in that case, each kid's family in that case could be paid out up to $500,000 for that incident. And then the 2 million aggregate is like a it's not lifetime. I'm pretty sure it's per year. I think an insurance company would drop you if you had more than two incidences in a year, probably, but the 2 million aggregate, I believe, is per year technically. And that just means, you have two separate occurrences. So two kids broke their leg on this day, and then one kid had an allergic reaction a week later. Um, then you get a whole nother million for that occurrence, 2 million total. And I do have a code for the $7. It is Gardener, like Gardener Kevin. That's what we used to call him. We would say, "Oh, there's Gardener Kevin." So it's just the word gardener, all lower caps. And I do have that on the next screen there. Yes, coupon codes. Um, yeah. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. And then let's see, I do have one last question that came in before the webinar, which was just um, about being listed as childcare versus a school. That's a really interesting question, and that's going to depend entirely on your state, what state you live in. So either one, in many cases, would be eligible to get a park permit or to do park permitting. Um, so, depending on your goals, but if you're looking to transition into becoming a school from a childcare center, that's actually something I've done before too. We had a preschool and homeschool enrichment program, and we actually began transitioning it into an accredited private school program. What it takes to do that is going to depend entirely on your state's regulations, and what your goals are for the program. So, really interesting question and something that I would love to talk more with somebody about if they were interested in it. Well, with that, I think that's all I have. Thank you so much for sticking on to the end there,
Wait,
Sarah.
since it's just me, I was just gonna ask.
Okay.
So that's actually what I'm gonna be starting as a like preschool and homeschool enrichment.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm actually registering as, I just wanted to see if you had an opinion on this since you've been doing this for so long, actually. I'm, so I'm in Florida, so I'm actually registering through DCF as a home-based daycare, and we're
Yeah.
going to be on field trips.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
since I don't have a location, like a brick and mortar building at any of the parks, I can't put an address on anything. So this is the way
Right.
I've figured out how to do it.
Yeah.
So since I'm doing that, I've been like going back and forth on if I should like, and now I've got more to think about after listening to you. Like basically, should I just go under the radar since I'm going to be on these quote unquote field trips, but I'm not really having anyone ever come to my home. We're going to be like at a park all the time.
Right. Is it going to be the same park, or are you going to go to a variety of parks?
Probably start out at the same park. Like maybe it'll be seasonal because obviously it gets so hot here.
Yeah.
Um, I have like a park in mind, and they are like so many homeschool groups do things there all the time that I'm like, no one's gonna care or know if I'm there. But
Yeah.
obviously, there's a difference with getting paid for it versus like a homeschool group just having a co-op fee and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just still,
Well, I mean, they don't really consider that different. I think, having a co-op fee versus, however much you charge for tuition. Um, I think either way they would consider that a business. It would be interesting if you found out what the other homeschool groups were doing. That might be kind of a good way to, stay under the radar a little bit too, because if you ask the park department directly, obviously they're going to know that you're privy to the
yeah,
rules.
then I
But I
blow my
do think,
spot.
I feel like everyone kind of gets one free pass with the like, oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
Um, so, and then you just fill out whatever they need you to fill out like
right.
right then and there. So I would say as long as you're like carrying the insurance and you're ready to
Yes.
like fill out the forms and drop a fee if you need to, then you could fly under the radar for a
Yeah,
good
that's mainly what
while.
I'm trying to do is avoid the fee because I'll be bringing my two own children with me and be super small. Like I'm gonna have
Yeah.
maybe at the most 8 kids. I don't even think I'm gonna
Yeah.
take that many. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I just feel like that's probably my best bet because I just don't want to have this astronomical fee that I'm
Yeah.
not even gonna be able to barely cover,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
would do that. And, I think it makes sense. I mean, that's how with my school in Seattle, when I had up to, my first 8 kids, we didn't really get noticed. And it was once we got above 8 to 10 kids that they started to, raise eyebrows at us. Um,
Yeah, I know.
and
I think the only reason it would get noticed is because it'd be less adults. Because right now, I frequent that park and many others with like a nature school group, homeschool group, but the parents all stay. So there's
oh,
no
yeah.
liability insurance and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But this would be different because it would be clearly like you said, people notice. So like
Yeah.
clearly, people would notice kids getting dropped off to me and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I wouldn't be ever taking any money on site. It would all be
Mhm.
online. So that's I feel like a difference too.
Yeah. I mean, that does help in a lot of cases. Yeah, I would fly under the radar until someone tells you that you can't, and then I would just be ready to pay the permit fee if,
Yeah, and
you
especially
know,
if I already have insurance, like it's not.
yeah. And then the other thing too is like you can use that time while you're kind of under the radar to build up some of the reputation piece. Like, if you're already kind of like waving to the park staff and building a relationship with them, or like, doing some litter pickup or any kind of like park improvement volunteering that you can kind of informally
Gotcha.
do. Get pictures of it and stuff, and be like, oh, here's this great picture of the kids, look at the bag of litter that they got. Like, stuff like that, because then if it ever, because the thing is you never know what, like, who and what kind of mood the park employee is going to be who
True.
like encounters your program for the first time. So if you get someone who's kind of crotchety, which there's a lot of those, then you kind of want to be prepared to be like, oh, like, we love this park so much, and look at how we, pick up litter, and look at
Yeah,
how
I
we
love
do this
that.
and that. So that your evidence of your time in the park is like positive.
Great. Thank you. That's good advice.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. I feel good about that. Thank you so much for your time. And
Yeah, thank you so much
I'm
for
definitely
being
interested
here.
in your templates here. So I'll go. Do I go to your birds with Brooke? Is that where that went
Yes.
through?
Yep,
Okay.
it's at Birds with Brooke, and then yeah, the coupon code Gardener will take it down to the $7.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you. Thanks for being here.
Okay, night.